Has the Bible been changed over time? A lot of people assume the obvious answer is yes. It was copied by hand. Mistakes were made. Changes have piled up. And by now people say nobody really knows what the Bible's actually saying. That objection sounds strong, but it hides several different claims inside one sentence. Because when people say the Bible changed over time, they can mean different things. They might mean it was copied. They might mean manuscript differences exist. They might mean translations sound different. They might mean the text was rewritten. And they might mean the original message was lost. And all of those are not the same claim. So in this video, I want to slow that objection down and examine it carefully. Not emotionally, not rhetorically, analytically. Because before asking whether the Bible changed over time, first we have to ask, what kind of change is actually being claimed? And once you do that, the argument usually gets much weaker than people think. My name is Greg, and welcome to Hard Questions About Christianity. Section 1. The honest part. Let's start with the honest part. Yes, the biblical texts were copied by hand. Yes, manuscript differences exist, and yes, mistakes happened. A serious Christian answer does not begin by denying manuscript variation. That would be weak and unnecessary. The real question is not whether differences exist. The real question is whether those differences amount to corruption. That is a very different issue. Copied is not the same thing as rewritten. Variation is not the same thing as corruption. Those distinctions matter, because people often move far too quickly from there are differences in the copies to therefore the message was lost. That conclusion does not automatically follow. Section 2. The word changed is too vague. One of the biggest problems with this objection is that the word changed is too vague by itself. If someone says the Bible changed over time, what do they mean? Do they mean it was copied? Well, sure, yeah, it was copied. Do they mean differences appear in manuscripts? Yeah, they did. Do they mean later translations sound different from another one? Sure, they do sometimes. But if they mean the Bible was rewritten so badly that nobody knows what it originally said, that's a much stronger claim that needs much stronger proof. And that's where people often blur several different ideas together. They start with, copies contain differences. They end with, the Bible was corrupted beyond recovery. But that's not one argument. That's several arguments blended together. And unless those claims are separated, the objection sounds much stronger than it really is. That's why this question matters, because a lot of Christians hear one vague sentence, the Bible changed over time, and they think the whole case is over. But it's not over. The question has barely even been defined yet. Section 3. The Dead Sea Scrolls matter. Now this is where the Dead Sea Scrolls become important, because they push the textual evidence for the Hebrew Bible back many centuries earlier than what scholars previously had in complete form. One of the most important examples is the Great Isaiah Scroll. It's commonly dated back to around 125 BC, and that matters because it gave scholars a Hebrew manuscript of Isaiah roughly 1,000 years earlier than the complete medieval Hebrew tradition represented by the Leningard Codex. That's a big deal, because when that Isaiah scroll was compared with the later tradition, the result was not textual collapse. Quite the opposite. A commonly cited summary is that the Great Isaiah Scroll is about 95 to 98% identical to the Masoretic text, with many of the differences being spelling variations or minor grammatical shifts rather than major theological alterations. Now let me be very careful here. That doesn't prove every Old Testament manuscript is identical in every detail, and it shouldn't be turned into a simple slogan. But it does show something significant. At a minimum, it shows that the idea of textual chaos is exaggerated. And it shows, at least in a major case like Isaiah, the text was transmitted with remarkable stability across a millennium. And that's real evidence. And it pushes strongly against the casual claim that the Hebrew Bible was just rewritten again and again until the original disappeared. Section 4. Variants do not prove collapse. Now, does that mean there are no differences in the manuscript tradition? No, there are. But again, this is not the same thing as saying the message was lost. This is where people often prove the wrong thing. They prove that not every manuscript is identical, and then they act as though they have proved that the text dissolved into confusion. But those are not the same conclusion. A copied text can contain differences without being destroyed. Ancient textual transmission can involve real variation without collapsing into meaninglessness. So the question is not whether variants exist. The question is, what kind of variants are they? How significant are they? And do they amount to a loss of the text itself? That is the level where the discussion actually has to happen. Not slogans, not panic, real argument. Section 5. Why the telephone game analogy fails. This is also why the telephone game analogy fails. A lot of people compare the Bible to a message whispered from one person to another in a circle until it comes out mangled at the other end. But that's a bad analogy for manuscript transmission. The telephone game is private. It's sequential. It depends on one person passing one message to one other person. There is no written record. There is no way to compare the message to earlier forms. And the whole point of the game is distortion. That's not how the biblical manuscripts were transmitted. The Bible was transmitted through manuscripts, not whispered once from ear to ear in the dark. Texts were written down. Multiple copies existed. Different lines of transmission could be compared. And that means differences can actually be studied. So the telephone game is designed to produce distortion. Manuscript transmission is something that can be examined. Those are not the same thing. And once again, this is where I started getting frustrated with how people casually would dismiss the Bible. Because a clever analogy is not the same thing as evidence, and mockery is not the same thing as an argument. Section 6. Copying and translation are not the same issue. Now, another confusion people make is mixing copying with translation. Those are not identical issues. A copied Greek or Hebrew manuscript is one thing. An English translation based on those manuscripts is another. People often collapse manuscript variation, textual transmission, and translation into one large objection. But analytically, those are separate questions. This episode is mainly about whether copying over time means text itself was lost. And the answer is that copying raises real questions, but it does not settle those questions in the worst possible direction. Copying by hand tells you human transmission happened. It tells you differences are possible. It tells you careful study is required. What it does not automatically tell you is that the biblical message was rewritten into something else entirely. That conclusion still has to be argued, and usually it's asserted much more often than it's demonstrated. So, where does this leave us with our question? Has the Bible been changed over time? If by changed we mean it was copied, and manuscript differences exist, yes. If by changed we mean the text passed through human transmission and needs to be studied seriously, also yes. But if by changed we mean the message was rewritten beyond recognition, corrupted into something else, or lost so badly that nobody knows what it originally said, that's a much larger claim. And that claim is often overstated. The Dead Sea Scrolls are one of the clearest reasons why. Because they give us real evidence that the Hebrew Bible, at least in major cases like Isaiah, was transmitted with a level of stability that makes the popular internet version of this objection much too simplistic. So the claim that the Bible changed over time does not settle the issue. It only begins the discussion. And once the discussion becomes careful, the objection is no longer nearly as decisive as people assume. Copying is not the same thing as rewriting. Variation is not the same thing as corruption. And saying the Bible changed over time is too vague to prove much unless the kind of change is clearly defined. Now that's what this channel is here to do. Not avoid the hard questions, clarify them, examine them, and test whether the objections actually hold up. If you want honest answers to hard questions about Christianity, make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel. And if this question is one you wrestled with, leave a comment below. I'll see you in the next episode. God bless.